This is Viewpoint with attorney and author Chuck Crismier. Viewpoint is a one-hour open-line talk show confronting the issues of America's heart and home. To express your viewpoint, please call 804-754-1988. That's 804-754-1988. And now, with today's edition of Viewpoint, here is Chuck Crismier.
Socialism is powerful and persuasive and almost solemnly seductive to the natural mind. In fact, it carries with it somewhat of a spiritual aura of doing good to all men. In fact, its proponents, while denying the authority of Scripture and the existence of a creator, often argue the authenticity of socialism by appealing to the Bible for authority. It's utterly amazing. And believe it or not, social reformers love socialism. It's a systematized substitute for the unselfish love and compassion that God desires to flow from every human heart to his fellows made in God's image. The Apostle Paul, you'll remember, exhorts us to do good unto all men, especially to those who are of the household of faith. But the unregenerate, that is, the unbelieving, biblically unbalanced human mind, rationalizes in response, thinking somewhat like this: if we should do good to all men, why not devise a society to compel all to do good so as to achieve a just society? Well, that's what we want to talk about here today on Viewpoint. There's a great deal of confusion, a great deal of deception that is going on in our world and in our own government, even in the Church of Jesus Christ, concerning the matter of socialism. And so we want to talk about truths regarding socialism here today on Viewpoint, and I'm so delighted that you've joined us. It's conversation with ever-increasing conviction, talk that transforms, and I trust that today's conversation will be informative and perhaps for some even transformative as we apply the truths of socialism here today on Viewpoint. Our special guest to help us in the conversation, Bob Knight, who is joining us with Coral Ridge Ministries. And Bob, it's good to have you on the program.
Well, I appreciate being on, Chuck.
This is a very, very timely subject. We're seeing it kind of intertangle its tentacles in virtually every aspect of American society now, through law and government, and even in our churches. Political correctness is driving a new undercurrent of socialism among Christians. And how is a follower of Christ to figure it all out?
Well, I think first they have to realize where socialism is coming from. It's certainly not coming out of the Bible. It's a perversion of biblical truths.
Well, but Bob, they would say it is coming from the Bible. They would say, isn't that what...
Oh, go ahead, Chuck.
No, when they say, well, in the New Testament, didn't the New Testament Christians have everything in common? And didn't they minister everybody according to their need and according to their ability? Isn't that socialism?
Well, actually, it was just the church in Jerusalem it's reported in the Bible did that. Not all.
Well, that's true.
Communities. And also it was voluntary.
Yes.
It was an extension of family life. It certainly wasn't imposed from the top down by government.
Exactly.
There's quite a difference. Government carries guns. They make you do things. You don't have a choice about paying taxes. You either pay taxes or you go to jail. That's the difference, coercion. But socialism begins with two wrongful premises. One, that man is either basically good or neutral. And two, there is no God. And so a system must be devised to perfect man. Both are the whole thing results in a quest to use envy as its driving engine. Somebody has something I don't have, so therefore I want the government to take it from him and give it to me. The genius of America's founders was based on Christian theology, that they knew man is of infinite worth because we're all created by God and in God's image, but we're all fallen creatures. We're sinners. Therefore, no one man or group of men should have too much power over his fellow man. Socialism wipes all that away, says we have to start with a blank slate, and then, depending on who's in charge, might makes right.
Well, what do you do with guys in American history, or actually in world history, like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and even John Locke?
Oh, well, Rousseau was one of the fathers of socialism, and he had a miserable home life. He abandoned his wife and children. He talked about the noble savage, the idea that man in a state of nature is innocent and perfectible, and it's only wrong social systems that corrupt his nature, which is fantasy. There's the beginning of that wrongful premise.
Well, he's the one that developed that social contract or social compact theory, isn't he?
He was one of them. Thomas Hobbes did it much earlier.
Mm-hmm.
In Leviathan, he said, we give up a certain amount of freedom for the government's security to protect us. And, of course, Thomas Hobbes, I believe, was an atheist, if not maybe an agnostic. So he was a very hard-line realist, but he was a little too, he didn't have the understanding that our founding fathers did. It wasn't tempered by Christianity. Whereas John Locke's philosophy was tempered by Christianity. And he had to speak in Christian terms to convince his fellow men of the rightness of his vision of a limited government that would allow maximum individual freedom.
Well, the reality is that a lot of this developed, laid the foundation for the French Revolution, and then actually took deep root following the French Revolution. And today, it seems that even in America, in the West, where we rejected most of the premises, the underlying premises of the French Revolution, it seems like we're making a headlong pursuit to embrace it now.
Oh, I'd have to agree, Chuck. The language of the presidential election of 2008 was right out of the writings of Marx and Lenin. It was all class envy. It was the idea that government will redistribute wealth, that somehow the wealthy are wrong and evil to have succeeded.
We're the ones we've been waiting for?
Oh, yes. Yeah, it sounded like a false religion.
It really did.
Obama in the stadium in Denver with the Greek pillars and it was really quite a spectacle. They really believe it. They believe a new day dawned and that the socialist revolution had succeeded and put one of their own in power. And everything he's done since then, I think, would confirm that. We have a national deficit now of $1.4 trillion and a national debt of $14 trillion. You know, right before Obama took office, the United States had accumulated $9 trillion in debt. So he has halved again that debt in just 2 years. It's just stunning how much they've spent.
Well, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. As a government and its leadership thinks in its heart, so it does. It becomes and converts everyone else into its jet stream. And that's what we're seeing. And there are questions now whether it's even possible in reality to recover. Today we're talking about one of the great isms of our time. It, depending on who you talk to and how far back you want to look, you can look to the middle of the 1700s or you can look to the mid of the 1800s with Karl Marx. But the reality is we're talking about socialism today. All isms are built around a nugget of truth, my friends, and that's why they're so persuasive. Because a person can find a nugget or more of truth and then rationalize the rest of their thoughts around that and form a virtual religion or a form of government or a set of principles, whatever you want to call them, around that. And that's why we call it an ism. And our world is absolutely filled with these isms. And they're not all isms related to government. We have religious isms, Hinduism, Buddhism. We have just all kinds of isms. And then we have communism. And then we have things like denominationalism. And we have Mormonism and evangelicalism. You see, the problem is that isms are just a fragmentary truth, and we have to be very, very careful about embracing isms of any sort, and that includes socialism. And the farther we look In fact, as we look at America and the entire Western world, we've drifted away from our biblical roots, our Judeo-Christian convictions, and the more we embrace socialism as a deceptive substitute to accomplish care in the social order. So inevitably, the source of trust for care of others is shifted from God to collective government. Well, that's a very dangerous thing. And today we're talking with our special guest, Bob Knight, concerning his book, Truth, or 10 Truths About Socialism. Bob, what I see happening here is a massive, intentional shift to lead the people away from any trust in God to total trust in government. What do you see?
Well, I sure won't argue with you, Chuck. That's what we see as well. And that's why we have chapters entitled such as Socialism is at War with God. And, you know, if you look at the early socialists, and you mentioned the French Revolution, after that, some of them boldly proclaimed that they were starting a new church of man, and they were crowning a goddess of reason in the Cathedral of Notre Dame. I mean, they committed all sorts of atrocities, and they basically said that you don't need God. We are replacing God with government.
Right. They dethroned God and enthroned reason.
Yeah, only it's not reason.
Well, they call it reason.
It's rationalization. I'll
Yes.
give it that. If you start on the wrong foundation, you can build a very pretty edifice using tools of logic and rational thought. But if you start out with the wrong premise, it's going to be something horrible. That's what socialism is.
Well, it is, but why do you think it's taking on such an in-depth embracing here in our world today? I mean, we've seen what happened in Western Europe. We've seen the decay of Western Europe. We've seen how, even from an economic standpoint, Western Europe is on the verge of total collapse. And yet we are pushing headlong in the very same direction. It's almost like they're literally trying to create a collapse of the Western world.
Well, you know, there are a couple theorists called Cloward and Piven, and they wrote a piece way back in the 60s, and it's now called the Cloward-Piven strategy. And they said what we have to do is bring capitalism to its knees by overtaxing the system. So the welfare system and so forth will collapse under the weight, and then they can shove aside the free market and just institute total government. And it looks like that's the plan. That's how else to explain the seizure of national health care, the seizure of automobile companies, the seizure of college student loans, on and on and on. It's been breathtaking to watch the government grow in power and influence. And I think the plan, I truly think that President Obama is a Marxist. I wrote another book called Radical Rulers, and it outlines his background and his associations and the many czars he has appointed, and some of them are card-carrying communists.
Well, many of them.
So I don't throw that around lightly, Chuck. I don't call people names. When I say communist, I mean they really believe in Marxism, Leninism.
And if they are not communists, most of the rest of them are self-declared socialists.
Yeah, in fact, there's a Democratic Socialists of America contingent in Congress, and a lot of liberal Democrats are actually outright socialists. Americans don't know this, though. I mean, the press isn't going to report it. They're only liberals, and then there are those right-wing conservatives. So the press is one of our biggest problems. They lie every day. I say that having come out of a media background. I was a Los Angeles Times news editor, worked on both coasts and in several newsrooms, and I can tell you that the media have gotten worse and worse to the point where now it's open propaganda. It's not even just biased. It's I was reading the Washington Post the other day, and on the news section, they were talking about Virginia, and they were afraid the new conservative government in Virginia, new conservative governor and House and Senate, it said in big letters under the banner, medical marijuana, gay marriage, needle HIV, needle exchanges, all of these advances may be turned back and progress will be lost. Something like that. And it sounded right off an editorial page.
Yeah.
And yet it was a news page. It's like there's no other point of view but there.
Yeah. Well, let's take a quick digression for a moment and look at a couple of the things that have developed just in the last few days. For instance, the United States Senate turning on its head the don't ask, don't tell policy to embrace homosexuals with openness in the United States military and therefore throughout all the rest of the society. How do you see this fitting into the broader socialistic agenda?
Oh, this fits very well. In fact, I point out in the book that the socialists, even early on, were all sexual radicals because they saw the family and marriage as prime obstacles to their taking over all power, because families anchored by marriage produce kids that have different loyalties. They have different values. They value family life. And this is the bulwark of the church, too, families. And that's the other enemy of theirs, the church and the family.
Well, those were the two enemies in the French Revolution. They came against faith and family.
They were very open about it.
And yet in America, the American Revolution embraced faith and family, and it sounded so similar to so many people. Who could resist a motto, liberty and equality, there in France?
Liberty, equality, fraternity.
Exactly. Yeah. And, you know, the problem is this egalitarianism totally wipes out all of the biblical concept concerning government, true government, and authority beginning with God. We're all equal. We're even equal with God. Egalitarianism.
Well, who needs God if man is God?
Right.
You know, that's the whole idea, to create the new man from the ashes of the old world. That's why socialists have no respect for our heritage. They're doing their best to wipe it out. I mean, we see this at Christmas time with the ACLU out there trying to destroy any semblance of Christian heritage.
And that's the reason why
scenes and school programs and you name it.
Well, it's gone even beyond that, Bob, in that just in the last week, the Fed actually ordered a bank in Oklahoma to remove buttons that they were wearing honoring the Christ of Christmas. And they said, you will not do this. You will not have anything that says Christ or Christmas in your bank. And this is coming from the Obama machine that is radically against God to raise up a government that will supplant the God of creation. That's what I see happening.
Well, they are doing that, and it's right out of Nazi Germany. And, you know, the old saying is, if you're having a debate or discussion, the first person who brings up the Nazis as a comparison is actually losing the debate. But we're not debating, Chuck, and I feel free to bring up the Nazis because Maria von Trapp, you know, the protagonist in The Sound of Music, a real-life person in Austria, and she was there, and she chronicles in her autobiography how after the Nazis marched into Austria, the children came home from school and said, Mother, we can't say Christmas anymore, and we're not allowed to use the name Jesus. And I'm thinking, gee, you know, that's what the Nazis did. They quickly tried to sweep away the traditions and religious observances of the people because they wanted to supplant it with their pagan, occultic, Aryan religion of Nazism. So now, today, we have the ACLU playing that role, and I will tell you something interesting, Chuck. I invoked this on a CNN debate a few years ago, and I just mentioned Maria von Trapp's comments. In fact, I quoted her from her book. I got an angry letter from Abraham Foxman, who is the head of the Jewish Anti-Defamation League, and he accused me of belittling the Holocaust. And you know, what do you do with that? I didn't say a word about the Holocaust. All I said was, this is what occurred in Austria, and you have it from Maria von Trapp herself. Maybe we should think twice about doing that in our schools.
Well, just to put some of this,
all offended.
Just to put some of this in perspective before we go into our next break, what I have observed, Bob, is that If we go back into the early to mid 1800s, we find most of these isms coming into their full. We have socialism. We had Darwinism. And then, toward the end of the 1800s, we had Freudianism. In the middle of all that, we had Hegelianism. And all of these great isms then, including communism in 1917, within a period of about 75 years, these isms now all emerged out of world history and now are coming together in what appears to be a joint effort that we call globalism. Globalism now is the synthesis of all of these other isms merged into one to make the world one. And if that isn't anti-God, I don't know what is.
Yeah, and it's all of a kind. It's all revolt against God because it's man making up the rules as he goes along. Mm-hmm. And the impetus is to free himself from the idea that there are transcendent moral rules that he must follow. As I said, this is why all of the socialist philosophers were sexual revolutionaries. They hated the family. We point out in the book that Marx and Engels wrote about destroying the family and replacing it with the state and having children reared collectively and so forth.
Will government replace God? If mankind has his way, indeed it will. In fact, my friends, the effort around our world to put a global government in place to replace God is moving at breathtaking speed. Did you know that in January of this year, the first permanent president of the European Union declared that the New World Order began in August of 2009 with the G20 summit? Did you know that? It already began. It's not something that we're looking forward to. It's something that's already here. It's just a matter of fully implementing now its procedures. Do you have any idea why Greece and Spain and Ireland and Portugal and now one of the other European countries, Belgium, their economies are virtually destroyed in bankruptcy, and the whole European concept is on the edge of destruction? Do you have any idea why that is? Do you have any idea why it is that in just 2 years, the President of the United States, under his administration, has brought in more debt, brought America under more debt in 2 years than the collective deficits of all previous presidents since George Washington? You have any idea why that would be? It's because the world, including the United States, is being set up for a new global order. And that new global order, friends, is going to be underpinned by a philosophy of socialism. Socialism. And it requires government compulsion to compel you to do what the government artificially constructs as moral. Not what God says is moral, but what the government tells you is moral, such as controlling the internet. This is what Barack Obama has done this very day, acted to control the internet so you cannot speak freely on the internet. Now, think about why a government would want to do that. What do you think about that, Bob?
Well, I think they want to do it to obtain full power and shut down voices like this one, because they want a return of the fairness doctrine as well. I'm glad you brought up that idea of the controlling the internet. That's the FCC, with 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and they're voting 3-2 to invoke net neutrality, which sounds nice, but let me explain it quickly. It's the idea that the internet will now be treated like a public conveyance, like telephones, and so the FCC can regulate it. Right now they have no authority to regulate it. Congress declined to give them authority overwhelmingly. A court decision recently said they have no authority to regulate the Internet, so they've just seized the power. And net neutrality says all conveyances have to be treated equally, all bits of information. Well, that'll cripple innovation on the Internet. Mm-hmm. Right now, if you want to download movies, it takes more bandwidth to do that than, say, send an email. And yet they're saying, well, all transmissions will be treated the same. That's like socialism of the airwaves.
Right. Well, what they want to do,
it's a terrible idea.
What they do is control by saying those things, setting those standards. Unwittingly, people buy into it because of the title on the bill, and unwittingly, what they don't realize is that the government has just usurped total control and can dictate now. It's hard to believe that America is turning into a dictatorship, but that's what just happened today through the FCC. And they didn't think they could ever get it through Congress, so they decided to do it by presidential edict through the FCC. Now, we're talking about your book, Bob, 10 Truths About Socialism. Truth number 1 was socialism was the wrong response to real problems. Truth number 2, socialism's founding fathers reject and do reject God. Number 3, socialism and tyranny go hand in hand. Truth number 4, socialism violates God's law. I think we've dealt with those two, but hit them again. Socialism and tyranny go hand in hand. Is that necessary?
Absolutely, because socialism goes so against human nature, which is to provide for your own, and not to have other people take the earnings that you've made, take the labor, the sweat of your brow. That's slavery.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a good definition for slavery is 100% taxation, meaning someone else takes the benefits of all the labor you put in. Socialism is basically saying that we own everything, we'll permit you to keep what we want you to keep, but we're going to take whatever we want.
And that is exactly the outlook, the underpinning philosophy of the entire Obama administration, isn't it?
Well, I think so. I think they've shown that they feel it's their money and that they're beneficent in letting us keep any of it.
Yeah.
They tried to push through. They tried to get rid of the Bush tax cuts, and of course they're lying about what has occurred. They were forced to restore actually all the Bush tax cuts for all income levels, but only for 2 years. So that still doesn't give stability to businesses and encourage them to hire for the future. And they also they didn't get rid of the death tax. They reduced it. But that's a very immoral tax.
Because it's co-opting the earnings, the lifelong earnings of families, individuals and families, as if somehow it really ultimately belonged to the government anyway. So we're going to confiscate. It's a confiscatory tax, saying basically we own it. It's our right as states or government to own it, but we're going to let you keep a little bit of it.
Yeah, that's right. And you know what they did to get it through, because it's so unpopular. It was supposed to go up to, it was supposed to attend to estates
mm-hmm.
of $1 million or more, which isn't that much these days. If
no.
it's a small business, that's, you know, most of them have more assets than that. So they upped it to $5 million as the bottom category,
mm-hmm.
and then made it 35% the government seizes. So it's still, the concept is utterly immoral.
It's confiscatory.
That, if you get more successful, we're going to take it from you.
Right. All right.
Which is the progressive view.
You said that envy is the driving engine of socialism. I agree with that. It is a philosophy that is rooted in violation of the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet, and literally encourages the people to covet what other people have. Class
that's
envy.
What it's all about.
Yeah.
And just think, they're basing what they call a good government outlook on a sin. She said it's right there in the Ten Commandments.
Well, it shows how deceptive Satan is when we have abandoned... think about it, Bob. All of the polls for the last 10 years have basically confirmed that even among professing Christians, no more than Christians can name no more than 4 to 5 of the 10 Commandments. Of those who don't profess to be Christians, most people cannot name more than 1 or 2 of the 10 Commandments. Now, if that be true, we have absolutely no foundational base whatsoever from God's viewpoint in which to establish and maintain a godly government.
Yeah, and that shows that the churches aren't doing the job, but also it reflects that many, many Christians have their kids in the public schools, the government schools, which used to reflect the larger culture's basically Christian ethos, but no longer. The government schools are now enemies of Christ. I'll just say it plainly.
Yeah.
They're teaching secular humanism. When they're not ignoring our Christian history, they're disparaging it as something awful to be overcome. And then Christians send their kids into these government schools for 40 hours a week and think it'll be undone.
All right, should we be
Bible study at church?
Bob,
what are they thinking?
Let's be honest about this. Should we be surprised if this John Dewey, who is considered the father of public education, actually wrote in the Humanist Manifesto that this was their goal for public education, is to brainwash the people, the children, over time, so that they could institute a global government.
Yeah, and that's the only way we could have gotten somebody like Barack Obama elected president. To have an electorate that ignorant, that prone to envy, that conditioned to resentment and group identity politics, to elect somebody this radical, this unqualified, and frankly, this hostile to all things Christian.
Well, this is the reason why people boldly came out upon his election and said now they wouldn't have to worry about paying their car payments, their mortgage payments, and so on, because Barack Obama was going to take care of it all. Now back to our guest today, Bob Knight, with his book 10 Truths About Socialism. Bob, we're looking at a very dramatic shift that has been taking place. It came on somewhat gradually in the 1800s. It metastasized into red communism in 1917, and we thought that the communist revolution was over, but it seems now that it's taken on a kinder, gentler form in the form of back to socialism, pure Marxism, and this looks like it's going to be the formative mode that is sucking people all around the world into a one-world government. Do you see it that way?
Well, that's what they're trying to do. I'm not sure they'll succeed, because we still have a sizable remnant in this country, and if that remnant is woken up and gets active, we can do anything. You know, you don't need a majority to affect great social change. You need an active minority.
Well, how about spiritual change, though? You can't really...
Well, we need that first.
Well, exactly. And here's the deal. Over the past 10 years, from time to time, I've asked pastors and spiritual leaders who have joined us on this program to give me their best estimate as to the percentage of professing Christians that they believe in America are prepared for the second coming. Do you care to take a guess? What would be your guess, Bob?
Oh, it's probably awful. Go ahead.
Well, I will tell you that the lowest figure has been 5%. The highest figure was 15%.
Wow. I didn't think it'd be that high.
Except for one Southern Baptist pastor who was so convicted on Calvinism that he believed everybody in his church was automatically saved and would be ready for the second coming. But I'm not kidding you.
That doesn't sound like a real Calvinist.
Oh, yeah, let me tell you, that was his viewpoint. And but in general, the average has been between 5 and 10%. Now, if that be true, and if the church itself is a remnant, we're only looking at 5 to 10% of those that are already the remnant that are even in any position whatsoever to deal with these issues in our country. That doesn't look very favorable, does it?
No, but, you know, God can do anything against overwhelming odds.
But God, yeah. With God, nothing shall be impossible. That's what the angel said to Mary, and I agree with that.
Yeah, and it's true. And we've seen
it is true.
Great things happen when people have faith.
And that's why I do what I do and left the practice of law to plead this ultimate cause to a jury of my peers, the church in America, for such a time as this. All right, let's go back to these 10 truths about socialism. Truth number 7, socialism impoverishes nations. How so?
Well, it removes incentives, and wealth is based on private property. You must protect property rights, and our founders understood that, and that's very biblical.
Yeah.
God hates unequal weights and measures. He hates theft. It's right there in the Ten Commandments. The Proverbs are full of managing tips on managing your property. Real wealth can only come from private property because people work for their own, and if for instance, contracts aren't honored if you don't have a system of law, so you're sure your contract will be honored, then with that uncertainty, you can't do anything. Now, we give examples of where socialistic principles have been applied and they've destroyed economies. Look at Venezuela today under Hugo Chavez, who's a compatriot of Fidel Castro. Just as an example, Venezuela used to be a big coffee exporter. They're right next to Colombia, and so they have very much the same growing conditions. And after a few years of Hugo Chavez's heavy-handedness, of confiscation, overregulation, just making it miserable for private enterprise, Venezuela now has to import coffee just for its own people. I mean, and that is typical. Anytime an economy falls into this way of socialists, you find poverty rising, and you find a more and more ruthless government to put the people down.
Well, isn't that the reason why? Isn't that the reason why Hugo Chavez has been intent upon usurping the internet in Venezuela, and Barack Obama beat him to the punch to take over the internet?
Well, it's true. First thing Chavez did was shut down 32 radio stations that opposed him. He shut down Global Vision, which was the largest opposition TV station. First he restricted cable, and then he finally just shut it down and arrested the owner. And part of it was because the owner didn't want to put on all of Hugo Chavez's 5-hour speeches. This is right out of Cuba. And, you know, you've got a tyrant growing in power there. You look over in Africa. Look at Zimbabwe. That used to be Rhodesia, and that was the breadbasket of Africa under the British. A very rich area, and after a few years of Robert Mugabe's communist rule, they've wiped out the economy. They did it by seizing land and farms based on racial characteristics. They drove the white farmers out. And they redistributed the land, and now Zimbabwe has starvation. I mean, socialism is evil through and through, dressed in wonderful robes of equality.
Exactly.
It never leads to that.
It does not. It's wicked and totally contrary to Scripture and God's ways. And quite frankly, as you point out in your book, even the earliest founders in this country at Jamestown and Plymouth had to learn this the hard way, and they had to learn it very quickly or they wouldn't survive at all. But they tried the socialism method, and it didn't work, and it didn't work very badly and very quickly, and they immediately turned to a capitalistic system. And it's not that we're preaching the gospel of capitalism. The only reason capitalism will work is in an environment of God's law and His will and His word and His ways. And if the people become ungodly, capitalism doesn't work any more than democracy works when the people are ungodly. So you can't argue against capitalism on that basis. It's the root of its destruction is sin. All right, truth number 8: socialism is at war with the family.
Oh yeah, well, we already kind of covered that, I think, Chuck.
Yes, we did, going back to the French Revolution, didn't we?
Right, and Marx and Engels wrote an essay called "The State and the Family," in which he said that marriages should no longer be just reserved to husbands and wives. They ought to have partners outside the relationship. Children should be reared collectively. And the family has to be done away with, so everyone owes allegiance to the state.
Yeah. Well, this is what's happened in Scandinavian countries.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. They, marriage is dead pretty much in Scandinavia.
Yeah.
They look to the state for everything. It's amazing that they're as well off as they are, and that's only because a few capitalist enterprises like Volvo keep bringing in the money, now we hear reports of the Swedish disease, which is that the people don't see any incentive to work anymore. So, you don't want a car that was built on Monday or Friday, because workers are recovering from the hangover, from the night before.
Oh, boy. Socialism at war with the church.
Oh, that's their
a
biggest
given.
enemy.
That's a given. If the socialism is at war with God, it necessarily is at war with the church, isn't it?
That's right, because the church is God's regent on earth, and we're supposed to represent through the Holy Spirit what God wants for human beings, and that's entirely in conflict with the socialist ambitions, which is to obtain all power and give it to the government.
Socialism creates refugees.
Yep, we've seen it the world over. You saw it in Vietnam after the communists took over there. You saw the refugees flowing out of the Iron Curtain countries while they still could before that Iron Curtain fell over Europe. That was so aptly put by Winston Churchill. And by the way, Churchill had this to say about socialism. He said, quote, "The inherent vice of capitalism is the uneven division of blessings, while the inherent virtue of socialism is the equal division of misery." That's what that
Whoa, that is pretty good.
Except for a few people at the top who lord it over everybody else.
Well, friends, here we are. As America is drifting dramatically away from our godly roots and righteous ways, the conviction is growing that a new society can be created that will improve mankind. God and his heart-driven gospel is being replaced by a man-centered gospel of sorts, and longing for heaven wanes in pursuit of a heaven on earth. Capitalism must be destroyed, they say, because it's fundamentally unjust. We have to trust the saving and caring power of government to redistribute wealth through taxes, nationalize health care, and cradle-to-grave social benefits. And as the church is reneging on its call to love one another, embracing the self-serving cry of a godless culture, democratically driven government increasingly fills the gap, leading, inexorably toward a final shift of trust, paving the way for a global government savior. So, let me ask you a question out there. Have you been seduced? Where do you truly put your trust? Where do you truly put your trust? Are you willing to be part of a rebirth of New Testament Christianity for the 21st century, where it could be truly said, "Behold how they love one another"? You see, that's why the Scripture says we're to use hospitality one to another without grudging. Are you doing that? What a time, what a season to begin that. Use hospitality one to another. In other words, open your heart, open your hand, and open your home. Let's be real Christians in the midst of this capitalistic country that is rapidly being converted to socialism and godless government. Thanks for joining us. A big thank you to Bob Knight for joining us. Get a copy of his book, 10 Truths About Socialism. You get the $15 or more to Save America Ministries. We'll put it in your hands. Get your copy of Seduction of the Saints. Your gift of $18 or more to Save America Ministries, both on our website, saveus.org. And I want to urge you to become a partner. Day after day, we're preparing the way of the Lord for history's final hour. Send your gifts by faith to Save America Ministries, P.O. Box 70879, Richmond, Virginia 23255. God bless you and be a blessing.